We have approximately 4 weeks into our fantasy playoffs, so now more than ever, we need to pay attention to our fantasy waivers because let's not forget, just 2 years ago, Amon-Ra St. Brown was a free agent at this point in the season, and of course, he won multiple teams championships. So now more than ever, we need to pay attention, and without further ado, this is the Anomaly Podcast on the road to 4K. Let's get into the waivers. Before we get into the waivers, I still want to show love to Dak Prescott. 42 points last week, absolutely amazing. Some honorable mentions. We have to mention Keenan Allen, CeeDee Lamb, two receivers that won us our weeks as they both finished approximately with the same 40-point mark for fantasy production. Brian Robinson, I want to show some love to him as he necessarily wasn't always, he's kind of your running back 2 or maybe even your flex play last week given the bye weeks, and he still came out and maybe won you your week. A truly amazing week there for B-Rob. And then TJ Hockenson, I mean, he had 10 receptions for 118 yards in the first half. He didn't do much in the second half, but that first half was electric, and again, tight end 1 on the week. Starting here at the running back position, Devin Singletary is the #1 running back pickup on the week, but we're going to talk about him in just a moment. For Antonio Gibson, he's owned in 52% of leagues. He shouldn't be on your waivers, but he's around that mark, so I want to throw his name out there. As if the game script for Washington says to throw the ball with Sam Howell, Antonio Gibson's production goes up, so he's at least worth a roster spot at this point. I know he's hurt us a lot in the past, but to me, Antonio Gibson, worth a roster spot if the game script says to throw the ball. For Keaton Mitchell, again, this is a guy that had a crazy week 2 weeks ago, and we thought, no way could he continue this production against the Cleveland Browns, and he did even better, right? So Keaton Mitchell, last 2 weeks, he's been very explosive. He's that splash guy that they need in that backfield, so he's definitely worth a roster spot at this point. Again, the top 3 guys are, but for Zach Charbonnet and Jerick McKinnon, Zach Charbonnet, it's very hit or miss. Sometimes, if the game script says they need to throw the ball, just like Antonio Gibson, Zach Charbonnet's production goes up. But if Seattle's up in a game, or if they need to close a game, or even if it's a run script game, Zach Charbonnet is pretty obsolete, as it is Kenneth Walker's backfield at that point in the game. For Jerick McKinnon, just for whatever reason, I wanted to throw him on here because, for some whatever reason, right? At this point in the season, they always seem to use him more and more the last couple of years. So Jerick McKinnon, someone to look out for, but some more serious names on some honorable mentions, I guess is a good way to put it. A guy like Ty Chandler, as Alexander Mattison will most likely be out with concussion this upcoming week. And of course, there's no Cam Akers already in this backfield. So Ty Chandler goes from the 3rd string to the starter in a matter of a few weeks. So you want to get a starting running back, at least start him for 1 week, and if he falls off a cliff, then just cut him. But for me, Ty Chandler is at least worth an honorable mention. For Rico Dowdle, of course, he's on the thumbnail of the video. He had 14 fantasy points last week in garbage time. And yeah, I get it. He's not a top free agent priority. But just with how inconsistent Pollard has been all season, especially in the red zone, I think Dowdle may have found himself a role in this offense. As last week, he had 80-plus yards on the ground. And of course, his touches mostly came in the red zone, as of course he had a red zone touchdown. But not to mention, I think Dallas is most likely going to blow Carolina out next week, as I mentioned before. And I think Rico Dowdle, in that case, might actually be a sneaky start next week if you're in a bind. As, again, if they get up early against this terrible Carolina team, Dowdle is going to get a lot more work to preserve the body of Tony Pollard. But let's get into Devin Singletary here, as he's been the clear-cut #1 running back over the last couple of weeks due to the injury of Dameon Pierce. But just based off of pure volume, I mean, last week he had like 35 touches. Only the elite of the elite get that much volume. But again, CJ Stroud has shown us time and time again, despite the matchup, this is an offense it's very high-powered. They're going to throw 40 times a game. And even though Devin Singletary doesn't bring much receiving upside, you always want a starting running back in the NFL, right? That's the ultimate point I'm getting at. Again, the downside is that he's not much of a receiver, and this is most likely going to be a split backfield when Dameon Pierce returns. But at least for the next week or so, Devin Singletary might be the starting running back, again, by himself in this offense. At the receiver position, Elijah Moore, Noah Brown, Brandon Cooks, and Jaden Reed. For Elmo, of course, if you didn't know, that's Elijah Moore. This offense has become a lot more concentrated over the last couple of weeks. We just traded DPJ to the Lions. So that is now where Deshaun Watson is throwing to 3 people. Amari Cooper, David Njoku, and of course Elijah Moore. So this offense is a lot more concentrated. It's a lot more simplified, more than it needed to be. But Elijah Moore, he had one of his best games of the year last year, and if Watson is really back like he showed in the second half of last week, Elijah Moore is definitely a pickup, and you want him, and maybe he can live up to that offseason hype around his name that we had, at least as fantasy players. For Noah Brown, Brandon Cooks, Jaden Reed, these are all guys that are nice pickups in deeper leagues, and ultimately I just think it's hard to rely on these guys just to continue their production at a weekly rate, right? Because Noah Brown, his production has mainly been there because Nico Collins has been out. When Nico Collins was there, Noah Brown was an afterthought. Brandon Cooks, he's had a couple splash weeks, but again, how much are you going to rely on him to play at that level at his age? And for Jaden Reed, it's hit or miss with that Green Bay offense. But the guy I want to dive into here is Quentin Johnston. Again, rookie out of TCU. He had his first career touchdown last week. And, in that high-powered passing offense of the LA Chargers. But just in an offense with no Mike Williams, no Josh Palmer, and now Keenan, he dealt with a couple injuries last week. We'll have to see if those linger on throughout the season. But if Keenan goes down as well, Quentin Johnston, it might be the pickup that wins us fantasy championships. And again, you want to shoot for upside, especially if you're a good team at this point. Shoot for upside. Grab Quentin Johnston. We don't want to wish injuries, but if Keenan goes down, this is a guy that is the #1 receiver in a high-powered passing offense for the LA Chargers. And then for the quarterback and tight end positions, there's not much to dive into here. You see a couple names on your screen on the left side. I even threw in Jameis Winston at the bottom if you want to shoot for upside, especially in some of those 2-quarterback leagues. But Baker Mayfield, I would say, would be the quarterback pickup, and maybe even Russell Wilson, as both of those guys have been playing better, and the Denver Broncos have been winning ball games. So both of those guys at the top would be the pickups for me going forward. All of them very solid. At the tight end position, it is the exact same 5 guys from last week. It's very just hit or miss. If you don't have the elite of the elite at the tight end position, you're banking on a touchdown. And for me, Jonnu Smith, Cade Otton, they bring the most upside out of players on this list. But of course, when Pat Freiermuth returns, if he's still a free agent, I would grab Pat Freiermuth because he is the #1 really option in this offense aside from Deontay Johnson. But that's going to do it here for today's video. Again, we ran through all 4 positions. This is the most important time of the year for us fantasy players. Again, for the next 8 weeks or so, we're going to be hoping we can make the playoffs, stay in the playoffs. Hopefully we don't fall out, right? And of course, when playoff time comes, we're hoping to win fantasy championships, make the right moves each and every week, each and every time, because one wrong move can ultimately end your season. But again, we'll be back tomorrow for our mid-season award predictions. We're a little bit late, but better late than never. And of course, we're also going to have our Week 11 predictions and our top 10 rankings in the league. So jam-packed show tomorrow. Of course, Amir will be joining us. But until then, stay happy, stay healthy, and of course, drop any questions, comments, concerns down in the comments. On the road to 4K. Get out of here.